It was one of those mornings where everything seemed too calm to be real. The birds chirped, the sun painted golden streaks across the driveway, and the quiet suburban neighborhood buzzed with the usual routine. Dog walkers, lawnmowers, and the distant hum of coffee machines. But that peace didn't last long. Not when Karen lived 2 doors down. Karen had a reputation. Not the friendly neighbor kind, more the self-appointed HOA enforcer who thought she ran the street kind. Everyone had a story about her. The time she wrote a fake parking ticket, the time she reported a trampoline for blocking sunlight, and the infamous Christmas lights incident that ended in a city fine on herself. But what happened that day? That was on another level. The camera would open on a gleaming blue sports car parked neatly in a driveway. Its owner, Jake, had spent months restoring it, polishing every inch until it reflected the sky itself. It wasn't just a car, it was his pride, his late father's last gift, a piece of memory on 4 wheels. That morning, as Jake sipped his coffee and prepared to leave for work, he noticed movement outside, a shadow by the car, then a flash of blonde hair in a bright pink tracksuit. Karen. At first, Jake thought she was just snooping. Again. She'd been caught peering over fences, measuring lawns, and even taking photos of people's garbage cans. But then she did something that froze Jake mid-sip. She opened the driver's door. The security camera footage caught everything. Karen glancing around, sliding into the seat, and fiddling with something under the steering wheel. The car rocked slightly as she tried to start it. Jake stormed out the door, shouting her name. Karen jumped like a startled cat, slamming the door shut. "Oh! I was just checking if it was locked," she said, waving her hands. But her face was red, her voice shaky. Jake didn't buy it for a second. He noticed the small key fob in her hand, a spare he had lost weeks earlier. And in that instant he realized she wasn't just nosy. She was trying to take his car. The neighborhood went quiet. Curtains moved. Phones started recording. Karen's excuses grew wilder by the second. "It was making noise! I was doing a community safety check." But Jake had already decided something. This wasn't ending with just words. What came next would make the entire neighborhood talk for months. Because when Karen tried to steal Jake's car, he came up with the perfect revenge, one involving a tow truck, a muddy pond, and Karen's precious SUV. The following afternoon, tension buzzed through the neighborhood like static. News of Cargate spread faster than wildfire. By noon, the entire HOA group chat was on fire, half defending Karen, the other half demanding she be banned from meetings altogether. And at the center of it all stood Jake, calm but quietly planning his next move. The HOA's emergency meeting was called for 5 p.m. sharp, in the community clubhouse. Everyone showed up, some for the drama, some for justice, and a few just for the free snacks. Karen strutted in late, sunglasses on, clutching a giant binder of evidence that nobody asked for. Her husband trailed behind her, eyes glued to the floor, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Jake sat near the front, arms folded. He had something no one else did, security footage. The meeting started with the HOA president, Mrs. Callahan, nervously tapping her pen. "We're here to discuss an alleged misunderstanding between 2 residents, Karen and Jake." "Misunderstanding?" Jake muttered under his breath. "She tried to steal my car." Karen leapt up before Mrs. Callahan could continue. "I was ensuring neighborhood safety," she declared dramatically, waving her hands like a lawyer in a courtroom. "That car has been sitting there for days!" It looked abandoned, suspicious even. "I thought it might be stolen." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Everyone knew Jake washed that car every morning like clockwork. Jake stood, clicked a button on his laptop, and the projector screen came alive with the footage, clear as day. Karen sneaking up, unlocking the car, sliding into the driver's seat, and trying to start it. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face turned crimson. That's not what it looks like," she stammered, spinning toward the crowd. "I was checking if it was secure, for the safety of everyone." The HOA president sighed. "Karen, it looks exactly like what it looks like." Jake didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned forward slightly, voice calm but cold. "You've crossed a line, Karen, and you know what's funny? I could have called the cops, but I didn't. Because I believe in teaching lessons the right way." Karen frowned. "Lessons?" Jake smirked. "You'll see." As the meeting ended in chaos, whispers followed Karen out the door. Phones buzzed. Screenshots flew. She stormed off furious, muttering something about revenge. But what she didn't know was that Jake had already made a call to someone who owed him a favor, a tow truck driver. And his next plan? Let's just say Karen's beloved SUV was about to go for an unexpected swim. By the time Jake got home that night, the neighborhood had gone silent again. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes when everyone's waiting for the next explosion. Curtains twitched. Porch lights stayed on longer than usual. Even the dogs seemed to sense something was brewing. Jake sat in his garage, staring at his car, spotless, safe, and gleaming under the LED lights. He ran a hand along the hood, still angry at the thought of Karen's fingerprints on it. He replayed her lies in his head over and over. I was checking if it was secure. He almost laughed. That's when his phone buzzed. A message from his friend Dave, a tow truck driver. Dave, heard what happened. You want me to handle it? Jake, how soon can you get here? Dave, got a flatbed free in an hour. What's the target? Jake, Karen's silver SUV, front yard. Make it look official. Jake smiled for the first time all day. He wasn't just getting revenge. He was teaching her the kind of lesson she'd never forget. By 11 p.m., the tow truck's headlights glowed faintly at the end of the cul-de-sac. The engine hummed low, barely a whisper. Dave stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, and grinning like a man about to enjoy his favorite kind of trouble. You sure about this? He asked, half joking. Jake nodded. Let's just say she earned it. Together they crept toward Karen's driveway. Her shiny silver SUV sat there, spotless as always, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. She loved that thing more than she loved her own front lawn. And she'd proven that by yelling at kids for breathing too close to it. Dave backed the flatbed up slowly, lining it up with precision. The winch clinked softly as it hooked beneath the SUV's bumper. Metal shifted. The tires rolled slightly. Inch by inch, Karen's pride and joy lifted off the ground. Jake could almost hear her voice in his head. That's HOA property. You can't do that! He smirked. Once the car was loaded, Dave looked over. Where to? Jake pointed toward the woods behind the neighborhood. Beyond them lay an old maintenance pond. Deep, murky, and perfect. Right there, Jake said. She wants to play games? Let's make it cinematic. As the truck pulled away, Jake followed behind in his pickup, headlights dimmed. The night air was heavy, the moon high, and the sound of the winch clinking in the dark felt like poetic justice. Karen had no idea what was coming, but by sunrise, she'd understand exactly what instant regret felt like. The convoy rolled slowly down the narrow service road that wound behind the neighborhood. The only light came from the trucks, headlights and the pale glow of the moon slicing. Through the trees, crickets chirped, frogs croaked, and the rumble of the flatbed echoed through the still night air. Jake followed close behind, heart pounding, not from fear but from satisfaction. Karen had humiliated him in front of the entire HOA, and now it was her turn to face embarrassment. Dave parked the tow truck near the edge of the maintenance pond. The water shimmered faintly, reflecting the stars above. A thin mist hung low over the surface, giving the scene a ghostly look. Jake stepped out of his truck and took a deep breath. Perfect, he muttered. Dave stretched his arms. You really want to do this? Jake gave a small nod. She crossed the line. I'm not destroying it, just relocating it. Dave chuckled. Into the pond? Exactly. They unhooked the flatbed and angled, the SUV downward toward the slope leading into the murky water. Jake grabbed the winch control. The machine whirred softly as it released tension, slowly rolling the SUV forward. The front tires touched the muddy bank, sinking slightly. Jake couldn't help but laugh quietly. This is what happens when you mess with people's lives. Dave raised an eyebrow. You sure this thing's not gonna disappear completely? Jake grinned. That's the point. She'll find it. With one last press of the button, the SUV slid forward, the rear tires lifting off the flatbed. Then came the moment. A loud splash that shattered the silence. Water rippled violently as the vehicle sank halfway, headlights still glowing underwater like eerie eyes. Jake and Dave both froze for a moment, stunned at how surreal it looked. The hood bobbed up once, twice, then dipped lower, settling into the murk. Only the roof and antenna peeked above the surface. Jake exhaled, relief and adrenaline mixing in his chest. Beautiful, he whispered. Dave let out a low whistle. That's definitely one for the books. Jake pulled out his phone, snapped a photo, and smirked. For documentation, you know, in case she denies it ever happened. By the time they drove back to the neighborhood, dawn was breaking. The sky was turning gold, birds waking up. And in one quiet corner of town, Karen's precious SUV sat cooling beneath a layer of muddy pond water. Jake parked in his driveway, exhausted but satisfied. Revenge, he thought, had never looked this poetic. Little did he know, the sun would bring chaos. Karen's scream the next morning would be heard 3 blocks away. The neighborhood woke up to the sound of a shriek that could have shattered glass. It wasn't just any scream, it was Karen's scream. The kind of sound that said the world had wronged her personally, and she was about to make sure everyone knew it. Jake was sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, already anticipating it. He didn't have to look at the clock. Right on schedule, 6:42 a.m. Across the street, Karen was standing in her driveway, wrapped in a fluffy robe, slippers soaked from running through wet grass. She was pointing furiously toward the empty patch where her beloved silver SUV used to sit. Her voice carried through the entire cul-de-sac. "Who stole my car?" she yelled, spinning in circles like she expected it to reappear if she shouted loud enough. Jake sipped his coffee calmly, fighting the smirk tugging at his lips. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Some even came outside, pretending to take out trash or water plants, all just to watch the show. Karen stomped around, phone in hand, dialing frantically. "Hello, police? Yes. Someone stole my vehicle, right out of my driveway. This neighborhood is full of criminals." Jake chuckled quietly. "Full of one," he muttered. Minutes later, a patrol car rolled into the street. 2 officers stepped out, both looking like they'd already had a long morning. Karen practically dragged them toward her driveway. "It was here last night. I parked it right here. You have to find it!" she cried, waving her arms. "Someone in this neighborhood did it. Probably him." She jabbed a finger toward Jake's house. The officers turned their gaze to Jake, who raised a polite hand and smiled. "Morning, officers. Lovely day, isn't it?" "Sir," one of them said, "Karen claims her vehicle's been stolen. You see or hear anything suspicious?" Jake set his coffee down, pretending to think. Can't say I did, but with all these cameras around, I'm sure something will turn up." Karen's face twisted. "Don't play innocent. You've been after me since yesterday. You humiliated me in front of everyone." Jake leaned forward slightly, calm and collected. "You humiliated yourself, Karen." Her jaw dropped. You'll regret this." At that moment, one of the officers' radios crackled. "Dispatch to Unit 12. We've got a report of an unidentified vehicle partially submerged in the retention pond behind Maple Drive." Karen froze. Her eyes widened. "What? What did they say?" The officer repeated it slowly. "A vehicle in the pond. You might want to come take a look." Karen turned pale. Jake simply took another sip of his coffee, watching her expression shift from fury to disbelief. The show was just getting started. The patrol car led the way down the narrow path behind the neighborhood. Sirens off, but lights flickering faintly through the trees. Karen followed in her robe, still muttering under her breath about conspiracies and neighborhood criminals. Jake, of course, kept a calm distance behind, purely as a concerned citizen, camera discreetly rolling in his hand. By the time they reached the pond, a small crowd had already gathered. Joggers had stopped mid-run, kids on bikes had parked at the fence, and a few nosy neighbors were live-streaming the whole thing. The morning sun glinted off the water, and there it was. The silver roof of Karen's SUV, half sunken, headlights still faintly glowing beneath the surface. Karen stopped dead in her tracks. Her jaw dropped. "No, no, no, no!" She ran forward, slipping in the mud, nearly falling face first into the pond. "That's my car! My car! Who would do this?" The officers exchanged looks. One of them crouched near the water's edge, jotting notes. "Ma'am, are you certain this is your vehicle?" Karen spun toward him with fury. "Of course it's mine! Do you think there's a second silver SUV with my license plate in this pond?" Jake stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, doing his best to look sympathetic, though the corner of his mouth betrayed a smirk. Dave's voice echoed in Jake's memory from the night before. "You sure she'll find it?" "Oh, she found it all right," Karen continued ranting. "This is an act of vandalism, a hate crime. Someone's jealous of me," one of the officers sighed. "Ma'am, we're going to need to file a report. Do you have any idea who might have wanted to do this?" Karen turned sharply, eyes locking on Jake. "Him! He did this! He's been out to get me ever since the meeting." The crowd murmured. Phones turned toward Jake. He simply raised an eyebrow. "That's a pretty bold accusation, Karen." The officer turned to him. "Sir, can you confirm your whereabouts last night?" Jake didn't even blink. "I was home. Ask my security cameras. They'll show I didn't go anywhere." Karen's face twisted. You set me up!" "You probably faked that footage." Jake tilted his head, calm as ever. "Or maybe Karma just decided to take a swim." The laughter that rippled through the crowd made Karen's face turn beet red. She stomped toward the pond again, demanding someone pull her car out immediately. But when the tow truck, a different company, arrived and started hauling the mud-soaked SUV out of the water, the damage became obvious. Water poured from the doors, algae clung to the bumpers, and the entire interior looked like an aquarium. Karen's jaw trembled. "It's ruined." Jake finally stepped forward, voice low. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before touching someone else's car." Karen glared at him, seething with fury, but deep down she knew she'd lost. By midday, the pond fiasco had become the biggest event the neighborhood had ever seen. Photos of Karen's soaked SUV, complete with ducks swimming around it, had already hit the local Facebook group. The caption, "Show Queen meets her match, Pond Edition." Karen was fuming. She marched back to her house, robe now streaked with mud, hair frizzing like static electricity. The police had taken their notes, shrugged sympathetically, and promised to look into it. But everyone could tell they didn't take her too seriously. Jake, meanwhile, was the picture of calm. He spent the afternoon washing his own car, humming to himself as curious neighbors stopped by to check in. They all tried to hide their smiles, but Jake knew the truth. Word was spreading, and everyone was secretly thrilled to see Karen finally face consequences. Later that afternoon, Officer Daniels knocked on Jake's door again. "Mind if we ask you a few more questions?" Jake gestured toward the porch. "Sure, take a seat." Daniels flipped open his notepad. "So we checked your security cameras like you said. Pretty solid setup. You really didn't leave your driveway last night." Jake nodded, perfectly serious. "Told you. I just like my peace and quiet." Daniels grinned. "Funny thing, though. Whoever put that car in the pond didn't break any locks. The keys were still in it." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Yep," Daniels continued. "Either she left them inside or—" He smirked. "The universe has a strange sense of humor." Jake chuckled softly. "Guess the pond wanted a new toy." The officer stood. "If we learn anything else, we'll let you know." When they left, Jake leaned against his porch rail, watching Karen pacing across the street, phone glued to her ear. She was on the HOA chat again, ranting about sabotage and targeted harassment. And then, the twist. A few hours later, Dave, the tow truck friend, texted Jake a photo. Karen's SUV, perfectly fine, parked at the local mechanic shop. He'd confessed to the police that he'd moved it himself, but only because Karen had called him earlier in the week, asking for a routine maintenance tow. She had forgotten she'd scheduled it. The pond incident? A decoy SUV, the community's old maintenance vehicle, that had rolled in after a recent storm. Jake laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. Karen's meltdown had been entirely self-inflicted. No revenge needed. The whole neighborhood's laughter echoed online, and Jake didn't have to lift a finger. By sunset, Karen had deleted her social media accounts and hung a giant tarp over her driveway. For security reasons. And Jake? He simply smiled, knowing that sometimes karma didn't need help. It just needed a good audience. By the next morning, the neighborhood had officially gone viral. A local news reporter had shown up at the end of the cul-de-sac, microphone in hand, trying to piece together what happened at the pond. Was it sabotage? Was it a prank gone wrong? She asked into the camera. Or did karma itself roll down the hill? Jake watched from his living room window, sipping coffee and shaking his head. He never expected things to spiral this far. The clip hit social media by noon, and the title alone said it all. Neighborhood drama, HOA member's car found in pond after heated meeting. Karen, of course, hated every second of it. She marched out of her house, hair tied back tight, clutching a clipboard like a general heading into battle. Reporters called her name, neighbors whispered, and kids giggled as she passed. The moment she reached the HOA clubhouse, she slammed the door shut behind her. Inside, chaos was brewing. Mrs. Callahan, the HOA president, was surrounded by papers and complaints. "Karen, this has gone too far," she exclaimed. "The HOA board is under scrutiny now. People are questioning our leadership." Karen planted her hands on her hips. "My leadership, you mean? I was doing my job." "Your job," Mrs. Callahan snapped, "doesn't include accusing neighbors of theft, creating public scenes, and calling the news." Karen's voice rose, trembling with frustration. "You don't understand. He's been out to get me since day one. Everyone's laughing at me." Mrs. Callahan sighed, rubbing her temples. "Karen, people aren't laughing at you. They're laughing because of you. You need to step back for a while." Karen froze. "Step back? You mean—" "Yes," Mrs. Callahan interrupted firmly. "You're suspended from HOA duties until further notice." The silence was thick enough to choke on. Karen's face turned pale. "You can't suspend me. I am the HOA." Mrs. Callahan simply stood, gathering her things. Not anymore. Outside, Jake happened to be walking by just as Karen stormed out of the clubhouse, papers flying everywhere. She stopped when she saw him, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat. Jake smiled politely. "Won? No, I just think peace and quiet are underrated." Her jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." Jake tilted his head. "You said that last time." Karen stomped off, muttering something about lawsuits and revenge, but everyone knew her power was gone. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt peaceful. Still, Jake knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never stopped. They just regrouped. And sure enough, by nightfall, her house lights burned bright, blinds closed tight, and the faint sound of a printer could be heard through the window. Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. For a week, the neighborhood seemed calmer. No shouting, no HOA notes taped to doors, no unsolicited rule reminders. Jake began to think Karen had finally learned her lesson. But peace in Maple Drive never lasted long, not when Karen was involved. Late one night, long after the streetlights flickered on, a faint glow leaked through Karen's window blinds. Most neighbors were asleep, but Jake, working late in his garage, noticed the light and the faint hum of a printer running non-stop. He stepped to his driveway, pretending to take out the trash, and glanced over. Through a thin gap in her blinds, he could see her kitchen table covered in papers, charts, neighborhood maps, and what looked suspiciously like blueprints. Karen wasn't done. She was planning something. The next morning confirmed it. Flyers appeared on every doorstep, crisp, color-printed, and titled in bold letters. Community Safety Initiative, led by Karen M. Because some people don't take rules seriously. Jake unfolded one, eyebrow raised. It listed new regulations Karen claimed the HOA approved. No street parking, no outdoor projects without inspection, and incredibly, all vehicle movements must be pre-registered with the HOA Safety Committee. Jake laughed out loud. She made herself the committee. By noon, the neighborhood group chat was in chaos. People were outraged, demanding to know who authorized it. Mrs. Callahan, the actual HOA president, was out of town, so Karen had struck at the perfect time, filling the power vacuum like a self-crowned queen. That evening, Jake noticed Karen pacing her front yard with a clipboard, taking notes on driveways and license plates. Every so often she'd stop and scribble furiously, muttering under her breath. Then came the moment that made Jake's stomach drop. She paused by his driveway, staring at his car again. Not touching it, not moving it, just standing there, studying it like it was part of her plan. Then she took out her phone, snapped several photos, and walked off with a satisfied smile. Jake's instincts tingled. He'd seen that expression before, the same one she'd had before sneaking into his car weeks ago. He checked his cameras that night, ensuring every angle was covered. Something told him Karen wasn't planning another public stunt. She was plotting something quieter, something meant to turn the neighborhood against him. At 2 a.m., a soft ping from his phone woke him. The motion alert. He opened the feed, saw only darkness, then movement, a shadow slipping between driveways. And just before the footage cut out, the faint beam of a flashlight gliding across his garage door. Karen was back on the hunt. The night air hung heavy with fog, thick enough to swallow sound. Jake sat up in bed, watching the live feed on his phone. The motion alert blinked again. Movement detected near the garage. He zoomed in. There it was, the flicker of a flashlight, beam sliding across his driveway like a searchlight. It paused at his license plate, then glided toward the front door. Jake's heart thudded once. He turned off his own lights, crept to the window, and peered through a sliver of curtain. Karen. She was in her jogging suit, hood up, clipboard tucked under one arm, phone camera in the other. She crouched, taking photos of his mailbox, his recycling bins, even the edge of his flower bed. Every few seconds she whispered to herself and scribbled notes. Jake reached for his phone again and hit record on the security app, saving the footage. This wasn't anger anymore, this was proof. Outside, Karen tiptoed to his driveway and placed something beneath the wiper of his car. Then she glanced around, darted back toward her own house, and disappeared inside. Jake waited until her lights went out before stepping outside. The street was silent except for the distant hum of crickets. He reached his car and pulled the paper from under the wiper. Notice of non-compliance. Unsanctioned vehicle activity. Issued by the Maple Drive Safety Committee. Jake laughed under his breath. The Safety Committee, of one. But beneath the humor, something uneasy stirred. Karen was building a case, not through rules, but through paperwork and photographs. She was trying to turn bureaucracy into a weapon. The next morning confirmed it. Half the neighborhood had the same notices taped to their mailboxes. Even sweet old Mrs. Reynolds got one, for over-decorating her porch with wind chimes. By noon, phones buzzed nonstop. Screenshots of the notices flew across the HOA chat. People demanded answers. Jake stayed quiet. Instead, he copied every video clip, every timestamp and every notice into a single folder labeled Karen Evidence. That evening, he drove to the coffee shop down the street and met Mrs. Callahan, who had just returned from her trip. Jake, she sighed, setting down her drink. I leave for a week and the place turns into a sitcom. He slid his phone across the table. It's worse than that. She's creating her own HOA. Mrs. Callahan scrolled through the videos, her expression hardening. This is enough to remove her from the board permanently. Jake nodded. Good. Because if she keeps going, she'll make enemies out of everyone. Mrs. Callahan looked out the window, thoughtful. Then let's handle it properly, quietly. One meeting, one reveal. Jake smiled faintly. Sounds perfect. Outside, the fog rolled in again, wrapping the neighborhood in silence. The calm before another storm. Karen had no idea that while she was building her case, someone else was building one against her. By midweek, the tension in Maple Drive was thick enough to touch. Every neighbor knew another meeting was coming, though nobody quite knew when. People whispered over hedges, exchanged texts, and speculated in the group chat about what the HOA would do with the Karen problem. Jake kept his cool. He spent the days before the meeting quietly visiting a few neighbors, the ones Karen had fined, accused, or photographed, showing them the evidence on his phone. Each time, their reactions were the same: disbelief, followed by relief that someone had finally caught her in action. Even Mrs. Reynolds, the kindly retiree with too many wind chimes, looked ready for justice. "About time somebody stood up to her," she said, wagging a finger. That Thursday evening, Mrs. Callahan sent out the official notice. Emergency HOA meeting, attendance mandatory. Topic: community conduct and board responsibilities. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. When the night arrived, the clubhouse lights glowed bright against the fog. Folding chairs lined the room, everyone filled. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, the kind that comes right before a thunderstorm. Jake sat in the back row, phone in pocket, a calm observer. Across the room, Karen perched at the end of the front table, a thick binder in front of her labeled neighborhood violations. She wore her favorite blazer, and that familiar look of authority, oblivious to what was coming. Mrs. Callahan opened the meeting with a measured tone. "Before we begin, I'd like to discuss recent actions that have caused confusion and distress in our community." Karen immediately leaned toward the microphone. "If I may speak first." Mrs. Callahan held up a hand. "You'll have your turn." The projector hummed to life. Jake's videos appeared on the wall, grainy night footage of Karen sneaking around with her flashlight, followed by screenshots of her fake notices and emails she'd sent under the title, "Safety Chair." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "She actually printed those?" Karen froze. "Those are taken out of context." Mrs. Callahan folded her arms. "Context being what exactly?" "Because the board never authorized a safety committee, or these citations." Karen's face went red. "I was protecting the neighborhood. If people followed the rules, none of this would have been necessary." But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. Even her closest allies looked away. Mrs. Callahan sighed. "You've done good work in the past, Karen, but this crossed into harassment. Effective immediately, your position on the board is suspended pending review." For once, Karen didn't argue. She just sat there, gripping her binder like a lifeline as whispers filled the room. Jake said nothing, only watching as the power she'd clung to for years quietly slipped through her fingers. When the meeting ended, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was silent again, lights glowing softly. For the first time in months, Maple Drive felt normal. But as he reached his driveway, Jake noticed something strange. The binder Karen had clutched so tightly now sat on the hood of his car, deliberately left behind. And inside, he'd soon discover, was something that would pull him right back into the storm. The clubhouse lights faded behind him as Jake stood by his car, the cool air thick with the scent of rain. The binder sat there like a challenge, neatly centered on the hood, the plastic cover beaded with moisture. For a long moment he just stared at it, trying to decide whether to laugh or worry. Finally, curiosity won. He flipped it open. Inside wasn't what he expected. No lists of fake fines or gossip about neighbors. Instead, the first page read in careful handwriting, "Maple Drive Safety Initiative Master Plan." Beneath the title were floor-by-floor maps of houses, arrows showing driveways, and sticky notes covered with cryptic reminders. "Check compliance. Noise violation proof pending." And near the bottom corner of one map, a red circle drawn around his property. Jake frowned. It looked less like a plan for safety and more like surveillance notes. There were dates and times logged, angles of camera views, even a sketch of his front gate with the word "blind spot" written beside it. He flipped a few pages deeper. Mixed among the papers were printed screenshots from the HOA group chat, snippets of neighbors complaining about her, and next to each, Karen's handwritten comments: "Liars. Disloyal. Watch them." Jake's unease grew. She hadn't just been enforcing rules, she'd been cataloging everyone's routines. He closed the binder, tucked it under his arm, and went inside. The rain began to fall, tapping the windows in a slow rhythm. At his desk, he opened the binder again and photographed every page. Then he sent a single message to Mrs. Callahan. "Jake, she left this on my car. You'll want to see it." "Callahan, I'm on my way." Within 20 minutes, headlights swept across the street. The HOA president hurried up Jake's steps, umbrella in hand. As she paged through the binder, her face shifted from confusion to shock. "This isn't policy work," she whispered. "It's surveillance. She's been documenting everyone, Jake nodded. And it's organized, like she meant to use it. Mrs. Callahan closed the binder gently. We'll need to handle this quietly. No gossip, no public posts. Just a formal review. Outside, thunder rumbled. Through the rain, Karen's house glowed faintly. Every window lit. Silhouettes moved across the curtains, quick, restless. She knows you found it, Mrs. Callahan said softly. Jake looked back toward the binder. Then I guess round 2 just started. Lightning flashed, illuminating Maple Drive for a heartbeat. In that brief glare, he thought he saw her silhouette at the window, watching. The binder suddenly felt heavier in his hands. The next morning dawned gray and uneasy. The rain had stopped, but Maple Drive felt different. Too quiet, too watchful. Jake brewed his coffee and stared out the kitchen window toward Karen's house. Her curtains were drawn tight, yet he could swear he saw the faintest movement behind them. A shadow that lingered too long. His phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Callahan. Callahan. Board's meeting privately tonight. We'll discuss how to handle the binder. Keep it safe. Jake. Already locked away. Any word from her? Callahan. Not a peep. But I've had 3 neighbors say they feel like they're being watched. Jake glanced toward the street again. The air was still, the mailboxes lined up like soldiers. Nothing moved. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. That afternoon, he walked down the block to check in on Mrs. Reynolds, the woman with too many wind chimes. She met him at her door with a nervous smile. "Jake," she whispered, glancing past his shoulder. "Did you see her this morning?" He shook his head. "No. Why?" "She was in my yard," Mrs. Reynolds said, her voice trembling. "Said she was measuring property lines, but she had a camera. Took pictures of my back fence." Jake sighed. "You didn't let her in, right?" "Of course not," she said quickly. "But it's like she's trying to collect more ammunition." By evening, a pattern had formed. Karen had been spotted near 3 other houses. Always with that same clipboard. Always muttering about compliance. It was as if losing her board. Position had cracked something open. A desperation to reclaim control. Jake decided to test a theory. He moved his truck from the driveway and parked it down the street, half hidden by trees. Then he waited. Just after midnight, movement flickered across his security feed again. Karen, creeping toward his empty driveway, flashlight sweeping the pavement. She stopped, looked around and noticed the missing truck. Then she raised her phone, snapping photos of the bare spot like she'd just discovered buried treasure. Jake recorded everything, barely breathing. The next morning, Mrs. Callahan came by before work. "We're voting tonight," she told him, "to officially remove her. But she's already heard. Someone tipped her off." Jake's stomach tightened. "Meaning?" "She's angry. I got an email from her an hour ago. Said the neighborhood will regret this betrayal." Jake felt the weight of those words settle like a storm cloud. When night came again, and the HOA gathered in the clubhouse for what was supposed to be the final vote, the parking lot lights suddenly went dark. The room flickered. Power gone. And from outside, through the blackout and rain, came the faint sound of a car alarm wailing. His car. The power cut out mid-sentence. The fluorescent lights snapped off, leaving the HOA meeting room in total darkness. A few startled gasps echoed through the clubhouse, followed by the metallic scrape of chairs. "Stay calm, everyone," Mrs. Callahan's voice said somewhere in the blackness. "It's probably the storm." But Jake knew better. The timing was too perfect. Outside, his car alarm wailed, sharp and panicked, slicing through the rain. He fumbled for his phone and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam of light revealed a handful of uneasy faces. Neighbors murmuring, eyes wide. "Jake?" Mrs. Callahan's voice came from across the room. "You brought your car tonight, right?" He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Yeah, and that's my alarm going off." Someone muttered, "She's out there, isn't she?" Jake didn't answer. He moved toward the door, pushing it open into the rain. The night was a blur of water and noise. Lightning flashed, and in that split second of white light, he saw it. The shape of a person moving away from his car toward the line of trees. "Karen!" he shouted. The figure froze, turned halfway, then bolted into the shadows. He sprinted after her, shoes splashing through puddles, the cold rain blinding him. His phone light cut across the narrow lane, catching glimpses of movement, a hooded jacket, the glint of something metallic, maybe a keychain. She darted behind a row of trash bins, breathing hard. "You don't understand!" she snapped when he caught up. "They're all against me!" Jake stopped, drenched, panting. "Karen, listen to yourself. You shut off the power? Set off my car alarm? Why?" She shook her head, rain streaking her face. "Because you're setting me up. You think I don't know what's coming? That binder isn't evidence. It's my protection." "Protection from what?" "From them!" she yelled, gesturing toward the clubhouse. "They've been talking behind my back for months. You all want me gone, but I've kept this neighborhood safe." Jake took a step closer, lowering his voice. Karen, this isn't safety. It's fear. You're scaring everyone, even yourself. Thunder cracked overhead, silencing them both. For a long moment she stood there trembling, clutching the binder she must have taken back from his car. Then her eyes shifted past him, to the line of approaching flashlights. The HOA members had followed them outside. Mrs. Callahan stepped forward slowly, raincoat pulled tight. Karen, it's over, she said gently. We're not here to attack you, but we can't keep living like this. Karen's expression faltered, part rage, part confusion. She looked between Jake, the others, the dark houses beyond. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away into the rain, disappearing between the trees. The group stood in stunned silence. Jake finally spoke. We need to call someone. She's not okay. Mrs. Callahan nodded. I'll handle it. As the storm rolled on, the lights flickered back to life, casting the neighborhood in a washed-out glow. But for Jake, the calm didn't feel like peace. It felt like the pause before something worse. Because on his windshield, left beneath the wiper, was a note written in shaky ink. You'll see why I did it. The note clung to Jake's windshield, soaked and half-torn by the storm. He peeled it off carefully, the ink smudged into strange, jagged lines. Only a few words were still clear. You'll see why I did it. He stood there, the rain running down his arms, staring at those words until Mrs. Callahan's voice broke the silence. Jake, come inside. You're drenched. He followed her back into the clubhouse, where the lights flickered weakly and the others huddled around a folding table. The room smelled of damp paper and coffee. Everyone was shaken, but curious too. Mrs. Reynolds clutched her purse like a shield. She's lost her mind, hasn't she? Jake handed the note to Mrs. Callahan. She left this. Whatever she's planning, it's not finished. Callahan frowned. Or maybe it's over. And that's just her way of saying she's done. But Jake wasn't convinced. She's been planning things for months. The maps, the surveillance. She believes she's protecting us from something. That means she thinks there's still a threat. The room went quiet. Then one of the younger neighbors, Adam, spoke up from the back. You think she found something real? Jake hesitated. I don't know, but I think she believes she did. The idea lingered in the air like static. That night, when everyone went home, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, replaying the old security footage. Not just from the last week, but from the past few months. He watched Karen's nightly walks, her note-taking, her angles of observation. It was obsessive, yes, but there was also method to it. She wasn't wandering randomly. She was checking the same few spots around the neighborhood over and over. And each time, she lingered near one particular place, an empty property at the end of the street, long abandoned after its owners moved away. Jake frowned and zoomed in on the footage. Karen's flashlight always pointed at the same patch of ground near the back fence. The next morning, he decided to see it for himself. Fog clung to the yards as he crossed to the old house. Its paint was peeling, the porch sagging. The gate creaked open under his hand. In the backyard, he found muddy footprints. Fresh ones, and in the dirt near the fence, something glinted. He crouched down and brushed the mud away. It was a small metal box, half buried. Inside, he found a stack of printed documents. Old HOA letters, neighbor complaints, and at the very bottom, a USB drive wrapped in plastic. Jake's pulse quickened. This was what Karen had been protecting. He slipped the drive into his pocket, glancing around the silent yard. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. And though he saw nothing, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him again. Jake didn't wait. The moment he got home, he dried the USB with a towel and slid it into his laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded a single folder titled, Maple Drive Records, Confidential. He clicked it open. Inside were subfolders labeled with house numbers. His, Mrs. Reynolds, even Mrs. Callahan's. Each contained scanned letters, screenshots of messages, and files that looked like internal HOA correspondence. But one folder stood out. Restricted, board eyes only. Jake hesitated, then opened it. What he found wasn't what he expected. It wasn't gossip or petty notes. It was invoices. Thousands of dollars in charges under the HOA name, approved by someone's digital signature. Payments to companies that didn't exist. Landscaping firms, security contractors, consulting fees. All fake. His eyes widened. Karen hadn't been spying for fun. She'd been investigating. He leaned closer. One invoice caught his attention. Maple Drive Community Enhancement Fund, approved by M. Callahan. Amount, $42,600. Recipient, Greenbridge Consulting LLC. He frowned. He'd never seen a new project or new landscaping, or anything that would cost that much. And the date, just 3 weeks before the whole binder incident. Jake scrolled through more files. Each showed the same pattern. Fake companies, money disappearing, and the approvals all traced back to the same signature. His stomach dropped. Could Karen have actually been right about something? The screen suddenly went black. His laptop shut off mid-click. He tried restarting it. Nothing. The drive's light blinked twice, then went dark. He stared at it, realization dawning. Someone had remotely wiped it. And if the drive was wiped, someone knew he had it. Moments later, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Jake froze. He glanced out the front window. A car idled at the curb. Black sedan. Tinted windows. The knock came again. Jake slipped the USB into his pocket and opened the door just enough to see who it was. Mrs. Callahan stood there, drenched from the drizzle, her expression tight. "Jake," she said softly, "we need to talk." He stepped aside. She came in, closed the door, and looked around as if making sure no one else was inside. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "You've been digging, haven't you?" Jake didn't answer. He just studied her face. Calm, too calm. "I know about the drive," she continued, "and I need you to give it to me, now." His hand instinctively brushed his pocket. "How did you—" She sighed. "Because I put it there, months ago. Karen was supposed to find it." Jake felt the room tilt slightly, his pulse hammering. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Callahan met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. "She was never supposed to tell anyone," she said. "But now you've seen too much." A cold silence filled the room, the kind that felt heavier than thunder. Jake finally spoke, voice low. "What did you do, Callahan?" Her answer came quietly, like a confession and a threat in one. "What I had to keep this neighborhood alive." The rain had stopped, but Jake's living room felt colder than before. Mrs. Callahan stood near the window, her silhouette framed by the faint streetlight outside. He waited for her to explain, but she didn't rush. She looked like someone weighing how much truth she could afford to tell. "You're not going to like this," she said finally. "Try me." Callahan turned to face him, hands clasped in front of her. "Those invoices you saw, they weren't what they looked like. Greenbridge, Summit Works, all of them, they're placeholders. The HOA had to move money off record for a while." "Off record?" Jake repeated, incredulous. "You're talking about hiding funds." "Not hiding," she said sharply. "Protecting. There was a developer trying to buy the entire street 2 years ago. You remember the letters everyone got about urban renewal? They wanted to tear down half the homes and rebuild. The board agreed to play along until we could outmaneuver them. We set up fake firms to stall the contracts and keep the land rights tied up in bureaucracy." Jake stared at her. "That's insane. Illegal, maybe." "Maybe," she admitted. "But it worked. The deal died. Everyone kept their homes." He paced the room, processing. "And Karen?" "She figured it out," Callahan said quietly. "She thought we were laundering money. I tried to tell her it was bigger than that it was for the neighborhood. But she didn't believe me. She started documenting everything, sneaking around, watching us." Jake exhaled slowly. The binder, the maps, the late-night surveillance. All of it had been her. Desperate way of trying to expose what she thought was corruption. "She wasn't trying to control anyone," he murmured. "She thought she was saving us." Callahan nodded. "And when she started leaving notes, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else got dragged in. You just happened to be in her line of sight." Jake looked at her sharply. "So why the act at the meeting? Why suspend her?" "Because I had to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If she'd gone public, the story would have destroyed us all. The HOA, the neighborhood, everything." He rubbed his temples. "So now what? You want me to pretend I didn't see it?" "I want you to forget about it," she said firmly, "and give me the drive." Jake studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You wiped it already, didn't you?" Her expression didn't change, but the silence was answer enough. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You might have erased the files, but you didn't erase what they meant. Karen's gone because she thought she was the villain. You made her look crazy to protect yourself." Callahan's eyes hardened. "Careful, Jake. You're starting to sound like her." He almost laughed. Maybe she wasn't wrong to watch us. Callahan grabbed her umbrella, heading for the door. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she said, voice clipped. "The developer's back. If this leaks now, we lose everything. Think carefully about what you do next." When she left, the room fell silent again. Jake looked down at the USB drive in his hand, the little black stick that had started it all. Outside, the rain began to fall again, tapping against the windows like a quiet warning. The next morning, Maple Drive looked normal again. Kids waiting for the bus, sprinklers ticking across green lawns, neighbors waving like nothing had ever happened. But to Jake, everything felt staged, like a set built to hide the cracks beneath. He watched from his porch as Mrs. Callahan strolled past in her usual composed way, phone pressed to her ear. She caught his eye, smiled faintly, and kept walking. Jake's phone buzzed almost immediately after she disappeared around the corner. Unknown number. One text. "Don't believe her. K." Jake froze. The letter K, it couldn't be. He looked around. No one in sight. The message had no traceable number, no reply option. Still, it was there. He opened his laptop and tried again to recover files from the USB drive. The main folder remained empty, wiped clean. But buried deep in the system was a single corrupted file. Recording 23BWAV. He clicked it. Static hissed through the speakers. Then a faint voice cut through, distorted but unmistakably Karen's. They said it was for the neighborhood, but someone's lying. Not Callahan, higher than her. They're watching all of us. The recording glitched, then ended abruptly. Jake sat back, his pulse quickening. Higher than her? Who was she talking about? He ran a quick search through the HOA's public website, digging into archived documents. One name kept appearing beside old financial authorizations. R. Marston, a man he didn't recognize, listed as city liaison. Jake followed the trail, each link revealing small but suspicious connections. Marston had co-signed every major budget increase for Maple. Drive over the past 3 years, and every time, the same consulting firms Callahan mentioned appeared. So Karen had been right again. Callahan wasn't the top of the chain. By afternoon, Jake was restless. He printed the documents, stuffed them into a folder, and drove towards City Hall. He didn't know exactly what he'd do there. Maybe ask questions? Maybe confirm what Karen had hinted at. But when he arrived, the front desk attendant frowned. Marston? He retired 6 months ago. Moved downstate. Jake blinked. Is there any forwarding contact? The attendant hesitated. No, but I can check. She typed for a moment, then frowned again. That's odd. There's no personnel record for him at all, just the name. It's like he was never officially employed. Jake's thoughts raced. A phantom signature. Ghost companies. Money trails that disappeared. As he walked back to his truck, his phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. You're close. Stop now! He looked up and scanned the parking lot. A car engine idled nearby, windows tinted. For a second, he thought he saw the faint shape of someone watching from inside. Then the car rolled forward, turned the corner, and vanished into traffic. Jake exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Karen hadn't been paranoid. She'd been followed, and now so was he. Jake spent the evening in silence, his dining table covered with open folders and half-drained coffee cups. Every page he uncovered seemed to twist the story further. Receipts, HOA minutes, and City Hall documents that contradicted each other. Karen hadn't been crazy. She had stumbled into a cover-up that went beyond their neighborhood. At the center of it all was that name, R. Marston. He found it buried again in an old HOA newsletter. Special thanks to City Liaison, R. Marston, for his continued support of Maple Drive renewal. That was the year the Enhancement Fund appeared on the books. The next step was to confirm whether those payments were real. He called in a favor from his friend Lila, who worked in municipal records. When she answered, her tone was wary. Jake, I told you I don't usually dig into private contracts. I just need to know if Greenbridge Consulting ever existed, he said. A pause, then the clack of keys on her end. Nothing, she said finally. No business license, no tax ID, nothing in the state database. You said this was an HOA vendor? Supposedly. Then someone created a ghost vendor account. It happens sometimes. Money gets siphoned through a shell, disappears before the audit catches it. Jake's chest tightened. So it was real money. Looks that way, she replied. Be careful. If it's still active, someone's benefiting from keeping it quiet. After he hung up, Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the neat suburban street outside his window. The neighborhood looked so normal. Porch lights, trimmed hedges, calm driveways. Yet under the surface was an invisible current of corruption. He opened his email and drafted a message to Mrs. Callahan. Subject, the truth about Marston. We need to talk. I know what Karen found and I have proof. He didn't hit send. Not yet. Instead, he printed the documents and slipped them into a manila envelope. He'd deliver them in person at the next HOA meeting. Quietly, with witnesses. Later that night, he stepped outside for air. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and shining under the streetlights. Across the road, Karen's old house sat dark, empty. But the curtain on the upstairs window fluttered slightly. Jake watched for a long moment. Maybe it was the draft. Maybe not. When he went back inside, his phone buzzed again. A voicemail, no caller ID. He played it on speaker. A woman's voice, calm, faintly distorted. Mr. Hayes, this is a courtesy call. We understand you're in possession of sensitive HOA documents. For your own sake, please dispose of them. Then a soft click. Jake stared at the phone until the silence became unbearable. The neighborhood wasn't just hiding money, it was hiding who owned it. And now, whoever that was, they knew his name. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center. By the time Jake arrived, the parking lot was already full. Through the windows, he could see neighbors gathered in their usual clusters. Polite smiles, whispered gossip, the faint hum of curiosity that always followed any special session. Mrs. Callahan sat at the front table, her binder open, posture rigid. Her expression was unreadable as Jake walked in carrying the manila envelope. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted coolly, "I see you've decided to attend again." Jake nodded, taking a seat in the second row. He waited as the meeting started. Routine agenda items, budget updates, community repairs, until the floor opened for new business. That was his cue. He stood, clearing his throat. "I have something the board needs to see." All eyes turned toward him. A faint ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Callahan's hand froze mid-page. Jake stepped forward and placed the envelope on the table. "These are financial records connected to the Maple Drive Renewal Fund. Payments authorized under the name R. Marston, a liaison who, according to city records, never officially existed." He let that hang in the air. Callahan's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation." "I'm not accusing anyone," Jake said evenly. "I'm just showing what Karen tried to tell us before she left." He pulled out a single page, a printed trail of transactions. Names of non-existent vendors, matching signatures. She found inconsistencies. I found the rest. Callahan reached for the papers, but stopped midway, her expression shifting from control to quiet realization. She leaned back, exhaling. "So you finally saw it." Jake blinked. "You knew?" "I suspected," she admitted softly. "Marston was assigned to us before I took office. Every time I tried to audit the renewal fund, I was told to leave it alone. The city liaison position was real once, but it was hijacked. I didn't know who." The room had gone silent. Neighbors glanced at one another uneasy. "So why not tell anyone?" Jake asked. "Because," she said, voice low, "the last person who pushed too hard was Karen, and they made her look crazy." The words hit like a cold wind. Jake realized that Karen's erratic behavior, the paranoia, the fear, had all stemmed from being silenced, dismissed, watched. She hadn't been unstable. She'd been overwhelmed. Callahan gathered herself and turned to the board. "We'll be forwarding this to the city auditor's office immediately. Effective tonight, all HOA financial activity is frozen pending review." A few people clapped, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Not celebration, but relief. After the meeting, Callahan approached Jake quietly. "You did what she couldn't finish," she said. "Whatever happens next, this neighborhood owes you both an apology." Jake nodded. She just wanted people to listen. Outside, the air was cool and still. The neighborhood looked the same. Porch lights glowing, sprinklers misting the lawns, yet it felt different now. Honest somehow. He walked to the edge of the pond where Karen's car had once sunk, long since removed. The surface reflected the moon, calm and undisturbed. Jake dropped the last of the documents, the fake invoices, the useless signatures, into a fireproof box. The truth was already on its way to the right hands. As the wind rustled the reeds, he could almost hear Karen's voice again. Not angry, not vengeful, but content. "Told you they were hiding something." Jake smiled faintly. "Yeah, you did." And with that, he turned and walked home. Not as the man who'd once fought Karen, but as the neighbor who finally understood her.